picking up on sort of rumors about somebody had it in their head that the airports would make a good place for a new homeless reservation or something of that sort. So from their vantage point, they're thinking, oh my God, they're turning the ground across from my house into a homeless encampment. That's what they were experiencing. So here we are thinking we're making the world better for business, and they think we're putting in a homeless camp. We
Chair
couldn't have been
Sneeden,
less aligned. It was very eye-opening. And we both kind of got teary-eyed. And I was like, I am it's just flabbergasted that you were able to hold that thought for
That
one
way.
second. I am so sorry. We got to talk more. Anyway, it was interesting.
Chair Sneeden, we are live on YouTube right now, so
Okay.
just to let you know.
Hopefully I've been saying complimentary things about my friends in Oakland, so I think we're okay. Do we have a quorum? Did we end up with enough people?
I believe that we did, but I believe
Let me check real quick.
we have Member Rice to Member Humphrey on. Don't see
Hi,
Member
Keith.
Frederick yet.
Hello, David.
We're one short, I believe.
Okay, so do you I know Todd couldn't make it. Do you expect
We expect
Amber and Ray?
Chair Frederick to
Yeah.
join us,
Okay.
at least.
We do have 3 minutes yet, so
Okay. Keith, how are things in your neck of the woods?
Morning. Hi, Chris. Everything's good. It's almost like I have to check every 5 minutes, but yeah, 5 minutes ago everything was good. So it just a lot happening in the business. A lot of growth going on, a lot of moving pieces. So yeah, it's all good. How about you?
Similar. We've got all sorts of, it's an ironic metaphor, but we got a lot of jets in the air. There's projects we're trying to attract and bring in. So it's very interesting. We need to schedule some time for me to come down and meet with you on the ground and just see your joint.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Just had a fascinating meeting yesterday with Evergy, talking about their projections for demand loads going forward with various things, EVs and all the cloud computing. There are a lot of reasons to believe that they're going to need to be generating a lot more electricity pretty soon. So they have some plans to do that, and they just want to hear about what industry's seeing out there. It's pretty fascinating.
That's probably goes hand in hand with Sedgwick County approving solar farms with some limitation. I mean, I've got 160 kilowatt a day solar farm here at my place, so we pretty much are electric neutral, I guess you could call it. So that I think there needs to be a lot more of that going on, especially to meet the demand of everything going electric.
Yeah. And they said, that's part of their mix. It's, ultimately, there have to be sources that are what they call dispatch. And I think you and I would say reliably there every time. Whereas solar and wind, kind of subject to conditions. It's good. It's part of the mix. But so they'll probably be building some more natural gas plants is what they were saying. So, hey, you give me the cue.
We do have quorum now, so if you'd like to get started, that's great.
Okay, good. Well, let's call the meeting to order this morning. Thank you all for being here. This is the August 15th meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee. I don't recall, do we go around do introductions since we're on Zoom, or is that thought necessary? No? Okay, good. Thank you for the light little head nod. That's a good cue. Why don't we I would defer to staff in terms of the way this is organized. The agenda seems to be on like page 3. Is there a reason for that? Did you want to pause on these goals or just go straight into the agenda?
Nope, we are putting together our packets very similar to the board. So this
Okay.
is kind of the new look going forward, but just mirrors the board. It just keeps our goals for the Tech Ed
Yeah.
Authority in mind. A little more
Cool.
organized than our one before was.
Okay, I like it. I guess the one thing that caught my eye is on the goals. I think today we are going to have a particular focus on let's see, probably goal number 2 there, I think, and 3. Yeah, probably 2 and 3. So there you go, ripped from our own headlines there. So guess I would take a motion to approve the minutes from the May 16 committee meeting, if you please.
So moved. I think I was there.
Okay, is there a second?
Second that.
Thank you, Keith. I can tell you that when I'm on Zoom, I kind of prefer to take votes by inverse. So does anybody object to that? Okay, the motion is approved unanimously. Are you okay with that? The cheaping of everybody saying aye on Zoom gets a little old. Very good. Well, let's move on to item number 3, consideration of our discussion agenda. And I think we basically have a main issue to work through today, and that's the results of the review of the extraordinary costs for those healthcare programs. And Carmen, if you want to feel free to dive into that and tell us what you found.
Sure. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. And yes, you will recall that we resumed our work on the Extraordinary Cost Project last year. I want to take a quick moment to just briefly highlight the role that extraordinary costs plays in the instructional cost model to put all of this in some context. The instructional cost model was originally developed to specifically identify the costs related to the delivery of technical education. It uses 4 cost elements that are basic expenses applicable to every technical program. So you have to pay an instructor, think salary and benefits. You have to pay for the buildings. This is institutional support, electricity, facilities, things like that. There's also instructional support, and this is student services, curriculum, advisors, registrars, things like that. And then we get to extraordinary costs. Now, these are the costs to present that technical education that really separate the occupationally specific coursework from the rest of the coursework that is also necessary but is not occupationally specific. And this is where we see costs that are related to specialized tools, supplies, equipment that are necessary for students to accomplish the hands-on learning that you need for technical programs. So the extraordinary costs is one of those 4 elements that we account for in the instructional cost model. And using these 4 costs, the purpose of that instructional cost model is to utilize the data submitted by institutions to calculate the cost per credit hour to provide instruction for each technical program, and to also determine what the state share is of that cost. The instructional cost model is not ever going to account for all of the expenses for our institutions. Now, all 4 of these components are reviewed and updated annually based on data from the institutions. And between these data, the components, and the resulting calculated rates, it suggests that there may be some special circumstances in which the TEA may want to identify additional factors for consideration to potentially deviate from those calculations for any one part of the instructional cost model for a specific program. So first and foremost, KBOR staff have suggested in your issue paper some factors that might provide some rationale to be considered for any deviation from the calculated rate for cost model components. And we also know that any of these circumstances may require additional data from institutions for evaluation, because all of this is based on data from the institutions. So we have for your consideration that we might give some consideration to programs that train specifically for employment in critical community anchor institutions. So think medical care facilities, public safety, schools, things like that. Consideration may also be given for programs providing training for specific high demand occupations, which also are stackable. They're sort of a stepping stone in an education path or sequence with other high demand occupations. And they also require licensure or certification at this program level prior to students being able to pursue the next occupation in the sequence. Another consideration might be programs which provided the targeted occupational training for which significant additional funding support has occurred at the state level. So we wanted to present some of those ideas. I would stop here to see if there's any questions. I would also, Mr. Chair, if you would like to discuss this separately, this is one of the recommendations that we're making. So it would be at your pleasure if you'd like to approve the recommendations separately, consider and approve separately, or do them combined.
Well, I appreciate my fellow committee members' feedback on that. It strikes me that at hand today is a set of deviations from the usual formula that are specific, but we're also, I think, undertaking a more kind of policy-based approach to when such deviations are worth exploring. And so it struck me that for precedential reasons, and maybe just to help the broader board and anybody who's watching the process, it could be useful for us to, in some sense, adopt those sets of criteria in a flexible way. But basically, this is what we look at when we believe it's called for to deviate from the usual calculations of the extraordinary costs. Not strictly necessary, because we could get to the punchline of this agenda item without doing that. But I think if I were on the board and I hadn't been through this discussion, it might be helpful for me to have these considerations sort of held apart as a context for the rest of the conversation. So I don't know what the others on the committee think about maybe adopting that as its own freestanding recommendation for the board to consider. Absent, okay, go ahead, David.
I don't know if I can see all the people that are on the call, but I can see Seth Colby. I'd be interested in a president's view of this. So I don't want to put you on the spot, Seth, but
Member Rice, no problem. Seth Carter Colby, going through and looking at the rates, everything that I'm seeing right now, and Ms. Chambers, if I'm incorrect, everything looks like it was either held flat or slightly going up. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
Okay. From going through and seeing on that one, because obviously on the healthcare side, it looks like registered nursing stayed exactly flat, which obviously we all know the costs associated with nursing. Nursing is one of the larger programs that most of our institutions do have, and do know the cost of nursing did not get any cheaper at all. We have given those individuals differentiated rates. We have the ability at our institution to go through and negotiate outside of the union based on market value. And we have to have the faculty agree to do that within the bargaining unit. But we have done that, and our costs did go up quite dramatically. And I'm going to guess most institutions did experience something like that. And I don't know, President Nichols, I don't know if you had something similar at Salina. I don't know if that occurred for you as well.
Yes, I would agree that our costs are they're not going down. We have gone through and tried to make sure that our instructional costs kind of match. We do a program review with all the data that we get. The institutional costs are divvied up, and quite honestly, some of our programs we have to support with other program revenues. So that differentiated tuition comes in to play because the high cost of some of these technical programs, and that's all we have is technical. So that makes it a really challenging thing. So having them, and I didn't get the packet myself. I think it was probably emailed to Dr. Jeanette that I didn't get a chance to look through all of those, but if they're holding firm or increasing a little bit, I would suspect that would be workable from our standpoint.
Okay, well, what I'm hearing is this sort of notion of creating a policy in the abstract and then attacking the programs at hand is a little ceremonial. So why don't we skip that? If the board wants to talk, look at it that way, fine. Let's get into the juice of what is really being discussed, as these two individuals just did. So, Charmin, if you want to skim on down, and let's go to the
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we finalized this round of data for the extraordinary costs for all the healthcare programs that were identified last fall. And we used the most recent 3 years. So this used fiscal year 21, 22, and 23. And all of that data for all of those costs have been received from the institutions. Now, the formula here is a very, very simple one. It is dividing all the reported expenditures by the total reported tiered credit hours. So think total costs divided by the total credit hours over which those costs were utilized in training. So this chart then on the last page shows the aggregated data received from all of the technical and community colleges for each program. And that chart is sorted by the zip code. In hindsight, I probably should have sorted it alphabetically, but looking at the very top there, just to walk through it real briefly, the second program is dental assisting. So you see the program name, the zip code, working left to right. The total tiered credit hours that were delivered over those same 3 years were 3,347. And the total expenditures for the extraordinary costs only, not instructor rates, not instructional support, not supporting bricks and mortar, just the extraordinary costs for tools, equipment, and so forth were 273,000 and change. So when you divide that $273,000 by the 3,300 and change credit hours, that calculated rate comes out to $81.69. Our current rates for extraordinary costs, because trying to pay out on all the individual rates would be a coding challenge, we'll say, for our data. So we have rates of $0 per credit hour, 34, 68, and 135. These were the rates for AY23. So based on the fact that the calculated rate would come out to $81.69, we're recommending that instead of $34 per credit hour, that be moved up to $68 per credit hour. And that's how the rest of this chart works, respectively, to each individual program. Now, the rate being recommended is based on actual data. Again, the calculation of total cost divided by total credit hours, except for EMT, registered nursing, and practical nursing. The calculated cost for these three programs based on the actual data submitted by the institutions would be $68 per credit hour. And it's an important note that when you look at those dollars, it is clear that they are the highest dollar programs that are offered. There's no question there. But we have to remember the second part of that formula is to divide it over the credit hours that are delivered. And these programs also have significantly more credit hours than most programs. That's the reason that they would actually come out to $68 instead of the $135. So, due to these programs conforming to those recommended special consideration factors that we discussed, we would propose that these three programs be held to an extraordinary rate no higher than that $135 per credit hour, with no additional consumer price index inflationary value added to it, until such time as the actual calculation for these programs demonstrates the appropriate increase based on the actual cost per credit hour data. And again, we have certainly discussed this before. These programs are significantly greater cost to the institutions to provide, and all of their data bear that out. But when we're calculating the extraordinary cost rate, we're trying to find a per credit hour rate, which is why we use that formula to divide all the costs by the tiered credit hours delivered. So that second part of the formula is really what is, if you will, bringing down that calculated rate for those three programs. So again, the recommendation would be to hold that steady at no higher than the $135 per credit hour until the data shows that the programs should increase based on the actual calculation.
John, I think you did a great job of explaining that, and very smooth official language. I wouldn't mind kind of playing that back in a slightly more layperson's way, just maybe to help open up the discussion a little bit. I mean, from what I understand, first of all, there is no ambiguity or equivocation around these being very important programs in terms of the sector that they serve and the importance of that sector. They are by orders of magnitude bigger than most of the other programs. So it's a big deal, and there's no inclination to give them short shrift. There's certainly nothing in this recommendation that entails reductions. So simply putting all of those three programs into the upper bucket for now is a way of acknowledging that, as I understand it. But the conversation that somehow needs to play out, I think, is what is it about the data that's coming in that yields what on paper is a relatively low per credit hour cost, when in fact, as Mr. Carter just pointed out, and I think Greg was kind of validating it, there are, it's getting more expensive. So somehow we need to breathe a little more nuance into the formula or something so that we're sure that we are capturing the actual costs. And I think that's the idea here. We're not going to cut anything, but we're going to pause the CPI escalation so that we can have a conversation and better understand how to capture the cost of these important programs. Am I keeping up?
I might interject if you're okay with that.
Please, yeah.
I would concur that that's going to be an important discussion in the context of everything. Part of the issue that I see from the perspective that we have, some of these costs may not be reported because they're not necessarily easy to report. An example, if a hospital gives us equipment that's expired, or not equipment, but supplies that are expired for them, we don't have to purchase saline bags, for example. So valuing that is a challenge for our business offices. They're inundated with so many other things. And our program people aren't going to necessarily do that. But I have no idea what a saline bag would cost, but let's say it costs $50. We're not actually going to purchase that because we don't need it if we get those supplies. But if we didn't have that partnership with the local hospitals, the regional hospitals, if they didn't have that opportunity, we would have that cost. So that is one factor of it's a cost. It doesn't cost us in that because we have an industry partner covering it. That's important. It doesn't necessarily make up, $3 million worth, but nobody's reporting that.
Well, before we move on, just real quick, because Greg, that's a great point. So one of the elements that we ask for in these extraordinary costs is donations. And we certainly understand the challenges around trying to estimate
Right.
what those dollars would be. But I can tell you that when we don't see donations of some sort included in an institution's costs when they submit them, we have gone back and said, essentially, are you sure?
Yeah.
Are you
And
sure?
I agree with that,
something?
Charlotte. Absolutely. That the staff does a great job of trying to get the best available data. My argument, I guess, it's not really, I'm not arguing with Charmin, but our people in other areas don't necessarily have the full understanding of how critically important that is to get the full value of that. That cost is there, but it's being covered by something else. So even if you say, are you sure? I don't know across the state, I've been at a couple of different organizations over the years, but everybody has, kind of a skeleton crew to try and do those things. It needs to be stressed. I think Dr. Carter would agree with me that we need to talk to our peers and stress how important it is to submit that data as accurately as possible. But there are other things that the state initiative to push for expanding nursing programs, that's great. But what that does is it actually reduces some of the burden that you have to have when you don't have those same seats. Examples, you have a lab that you have to, a simulation lab, you're going to have that cost. So if you're go from 15 to 20 students in there, the cost was the same, but the ratio is down. Well, everybody's pushing us to add to the program. So you kind of are getting hammered on the other end if you do what everybody needs, which is more nurses, and you add to your nursing program, then you don't necessarily need to add 5 additional simulators because you have them, you just become efficient. But then, that efficiency is ending up kind of on the backside hurting us. But let's say you don't have that enrollment come through in a particular year or 2 or 3, then you still have to have the same equipment, you have fewer numbers, that cost is going to go up pretty significantly if the credit hour generation drops.
Okay, so Greg, yeah, again, we're not arguing. I appreciate that. And I am really just trying to wrap my head around this. So please don't take this as a challenge to what you just said, but it seems as, so in my simple mind, if a capital investment is made in something like a simulator,
those are the ones to report.
Yeah.
Frankly.
But the per unit cost that's allocated to that based on the number of kiddo or students that are utilizing it, if it's 20, then it's a function of the cost. If it's 50, it's a lower number, but it's more reimbursements for more students. So doesn't that kind of just lay out the same way Now, I can see what you're saying. If you had a bunch of students one year and then the next year you had a big drop and you're stuck with this rate, and the implications of your cost input that led to this rate, then now you're behind that year. So I think I understood that part. This is based on 3-year averages, is it not? Or 3 years of data, if not an average, right?
3 years. of
Okay.
data. Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, it absolutely is. And I'm not sure in our program if, and Charmin, you may know, there was one extraordinary cost analysis. We didn't even have any of our registered nursing in it because our program is not as old as some other programs. So I don't know if it's this data, but I don't think we submitted anything in one of the extraordinary costs because we didn't have the program long enough.
Because you didn't start it yet.
Right.
You didn't actually have costs during the years that we're collecting.
Right. But
I
those
don't
costs,
I don't remember exactly. Yeah.
so
Okay.
I mean that's not gonna, that's neither here nor there, but if you're calculating the credit hours generated from our school and you have zero cost, that's gonna skew it a little bit. I mean, it's not, there's still big numbers there.
Okay, that's helpful. Are there other examples of special circumstances that cause the formula to kind of not accurately turn out the extraordinary costs? Yes, sir. Dr. Carter.
Thank you, Chair Sneeden and Director Chambers. Thank you all for the explanation on that. I do think there are some critical things that may not be evaluated within that. When you go through and you look at the volume of credit hours produced, it does get slightly skewed when you compare smaller institutions that are delivering those credit hours versus larger ones. If you go through and you start trying to aggregate totals on this, the cost of delivery at Colby Community College, when I teach a nursing class that may have 18 students in it versus I know I have a peer institution that has 50 students in their nursing program. The costs are going to range depending upon the size of the institution, the cost of delivery. I think assumptions are also made that every bit of data that we report as institutions is accurate. I do have concerns about that, and Director Chambers, I know you know that as well, because they are very helpful about sending it back and saying, are you really accurately capturing all your costs? When you go through and you look at some of the turnover that we've had within institutions, our CFO has become one of the longest tenured amongst the community college, and she's been here for 3 years. So when you really start going through and looking at some of that turnover, and to President Nichols' point, making sure everything is accurately captured, and that's not me throwing stones at anybody's glass house, but when you're really going through and saying, is everybody accurately reporting cost? I would find that difficult to believe that everyone is truly capturing all their expenses associated with it, especially when you do have newer individuals in roles where they could be having some of those challenges. And I do echo what President Nichols stated. Director Chambers and her team, Vice President White, do an excellent job of giving us the opportunity to correct it. However, the point that I would make on that is sometimes they don't know what they don't know. So going through and trying to accurately capture cost, they may not have all the information to do that. Sorry, I'm
That's
getting a bunch
fair.
of- bunch of email.
That sounds like a very candid and fair depiction of reality out there. I'm sure you can appreciate why those of us on the TEA whose job includes that goal we talked about, it would be a challenge for us to continue indefinitely, with a formula that's not doing it, kind of not turning out the right math because there's, tough time, what you just said. So,
I can think of one of our large institutions that's had 3 CFOs in the last year and a half. So going
That's
through
tough.
and trying to capture that information accurately, and that's I'm not blaming anybody on that,
Yeah.
but to go through and say 100% of costs are captured and then accurately reported by our institutions, I
That
don't
wouldn't-
believe that to be accurate. I
Yeah,
don't.
that wouldn't be a realistic statement. Yeah, I hear you. Anything else that you think would help us understand the apparent kind of algorithmic disconnect here?
Hey Curtis, this is Ray Frederick. I'm
Hi,
sorry.
I'm glad you're on. That's
I
okay.
had trouble getting on, but I'd like to respond and I'm sorry that I'm late.
Okay.
But just to Seth's comments. I'm sorry, Seth. I have a hard time accepting that as a valid excuse for data. I mean, it's your responsibility and you personally and other institutions, their leadership, to get the data correct. I don't care how many CFOs you've had, quite frankly. I mean, that just doesn't fly with me. And I hope that doesn't sound too harsh, but it's like, oh, it's not my fault. Well, excuse me. It's not the staff's responsibility, to try to educate, re-educate, and then educate some more of these individuals. It becomes the institution's responsibility. And as the president of an institution, I think it falls on the president's shoulders to make sure. Have we checked? Have we double checked? Have we gone back and revisited this data and these numbers? Are we confident about what's being sent to Topeka? So I struggle with that explanation, quite frankly.
I appreciate that, Member Frederick. Let me go through and provide another level of clarification on that statement. So I report out on Colby Community College. I report out on one of the 26 of us. If another institution reports out inaccurate information, then goes through and skews averages, what control do I have over that? I can only control Colby's data. And I think Director Chambers can speak to this, and I know Vice President White can as well. I know we're very responsive as an institution. I know we provide the data. I know we provide it in a timely manner. I can't account for 25 other institutions, nor do I have the ability, nor would anyone else on here. So I appreciate what you're saying, but I think to go through and say that, each institution is responsible for their own data, I would completely agree with. But when that aggregate affects all 26 of us, I'm not sure I can agree with your statement.
Well, then your message as a group needs to be, hey folks, this hurts all of us in some ways. So get it right.
Sure. And I don't know exactly when you got on, Member Frederick, but one of the things that we talked about that when I was speaking before, and I think Dr. Carter agreed with, is we know how important this is. I know Seth very well, good friends. We know how important it is. We are trying to get the same level of importance, that message across the two-year sector, and I think he alluded to this earlier, you have an economy of scale. There are some big numbers of nursing program. I mean, there's some programs that are 10 times larger than either of our institutions. We can't control their reporting, but they also have a different ratio of, frankly, their profitability or break-even point is different than ours. And so when that skews the data, whether it's accurate or inaccurate, let's assume it's 100% accurate. That means that they have the resources in their communities to support a lower cost than other institutions do. Therefore, if you take it as a system across the state, how do you support the western 2/3 of the state when, I don't know if we have the particular numbers, but some of the largest nursing institutions are Butler, Washburn, Johnson County, KCK. They have huge enrollments comparatively. So when their data is bigger and they have more efficiencies built in their systems than we can do as smaller institutions, I think that's that's something that the committee can take a look at and say, okay, maybe there are some differences, but you can't differentiate the tuition or the reimbursement rate for different colleges. I don't think you can. I wouldn't suggest that. That's not my.
You're absolutely right. We would not want to do that. We would definitely want to stick with that system rate. So perhaps what I'm hearing, maybe a way to paraphrase it, to use some of Chair Sneeden's approaches, maybe the comment really is that from the technical and community college aspect, one of the special considerations that they would like to offer up would be that scale situation. I don't see a scenario where we would ever want to move away from a system-wide rate, because we also know that, you know, rising tides raise all boats, as well. So there are certainly benefits there. And again, we're also, what we're doing with the cost model itself, the entire point of the extraordinary costs is just 1/4 of that formula. And we're trying to put a cost to the cost of instruction. And then we're also using that to try to provide the data that we need to say, this is what the state's share of that should be. So again, would it be fair to say that the comments offered are in participation with that idea of some special considerations that we might want to put forth?
Yeah, don't take anything I say as like a bona fide recommendation. We're brainstorming now. Okay, so don't say, hey, this is where it's going, because I'm prone to throw out ideas that turn out to be kind of bad. But if I hear you saying that some of the smaller institutions, the larger institutions may well enjoy economies of scale that enable them to deliver these hours at a higher efficiency rate or something in terms of the per unit extraordinary costs than some of the smaller programs. Doesn't mean the smaller ones are inefficient. It just means it works out that these programs cost you more per unit. Is there a rather than have a different rate per school or something? That does sound very not good. Is there any way to pull back the hood on the way the costs are accounted for, to put in some sort of coefficient that says, since we're in a non-metro situation, you know, here's tack this on or something? I'm just throwing that out there. It's probably a terrible idea, but that would seem to me to have the sensitivity that I think Mr. Nichols was driving at.
If I could answer to that, I was at K-12 for a few years early in my career, and anyone remember the legislative battle we've had for maybe a decade with the K-12 funding?
Mm-hmm.
And it was based upon the larger school districts were getting a lower rate than the small school districts. And so, and I forgot what was the name of that? There was kind of
local yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and so that has been a
Local
battle
option.
between the Kansas legislature and the Kansas Supreme Court for many, many years. And I think they basically got away with it in the K-12 system and do base funding for the students. It's the same at Wichita as it is in Topeka, as it is in, Western Kansas. So I think that would be counterintuitive if basically the Supreme Court of Kansas has said you need to pay the same rate for every student, no matter what district they go in. It's kind of I don't know.
Well, I guess what I would say for our purposes here is that that's a great example of the conversation that needs to continue so that we can try to figure this out. I don't think that this meeting was designed to figure it out. So thank you for all your input. Does anybody on the committee, I would be inclined to, ask for a motion to approve this recommendation for passage on to the full TEA for their consideration at their next meeting. And embedded in this is that the conversation we've just had needs to be kind of carried forward. So, Charmin, does that sound okay? Are we on track there?
I think so. So I just want to make sure that I sort of understand, because when we talk about this instructional cost model, one of the features that is really important is that it actually is paying the institutions the same rate for the same course, no matter where they are. No matter what size their program is, no matter any of those variables, because it is trying to equalize, if you will, situations that aren't necessarily equal. So in my mind, I'm thinking that some of these considerations in terms of, we have a program and there are a number of institutions that offer it, and we recognize that institutions have various sizes, if you will, might be something that we would plug into that list of, this might be a time to include that along with the other special considerations that we've put forth. Does that sound sort of like where we're headed?
Yeah, this way, I think so, and I will make that motion, Curtis. So move for this to be move forward to our full discussion of the TA.
I'll second that.
Okay, thanks, guys. Does anybody on the committee oppose that motion? Okay, so I think the board's in unanimous consensus on that. So that will go on. Will that be the next TEA board meeting, Charmin, or is this need to be plated up?
Nope, it will be on the next TEA meeting here in 2 weeks. I don't have my calendar in front of me, but 2 weeks from now, and we will put it on the discussion agenda.
Now that's the 29th of this month. Let me just say that I am not interested in kicking this can down the road. So I look forward to a full discussion in our TEA meeting.
Okay, good. Well, that being said, I think we've conducted our business. Our next committee meeting is Thursday, September 12th. And unless any of the committee members have something they'd like to add, I think we could stand adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Curtis, I'm
Appreciate your
sorry, I
participation.
had trouble getting on. I don't know.
Well, you missed all the best jokes, Ray, but I think you
Well,
got in on the nuggets, so
then I'm
you're
not
good.
sorry. So, all right. Hey, thank you.
you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you all. We appreciate
Thank
you.
you. Thank
Be
you.
safe.
Bye-bye.